My parents tried to force me to fund my sister's startup while I was struggling, so I cut them off completely and left them with nothing. I'm a 25-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, my family treated me like their personal safety net, Evan, when I could barely save myself. Most days I wake up before the sun rises, drag myself from one job to the other, and collapse into bed past midnight like someone running on fumes. My rent is always a week away from being late. My bills are a juggling act, and I'm still trying to recover from a brutal year that left my savings dried out and my mental health even worse. I keep telling myself things will get better eventually, that the grind will stabilize, but some nights I'm not even sure I believe it anymore. My younger sister Emily lives in a completely different universe, one where responsibility is optional and dreams are currency. She's never held a real job, never stuck with anything longer than a few months, and still my parents praise her like she's destined to change the world. She's creative, they always say, as if that alone is supposed to explain every impulsive decision or failed attempt she abandons halfway through. Sometimes I wonder if they actually see her, or if they're just in love with the idea of who they want her to be. They've always pressured me to support her dreams, insisting she make a big one. Day I can still hear my mom saying it, her voice soft but sharp underneath. You're her big brother. She needs you. And my dad chiming in, family helps family. Those words used to guilt me into helping with little things, meal money, school supplies, but lately they've repeated them with a different weight, like they're setting me up for something. And that's what scares me, because over the last few weeks, they've been unusually sweet to me, checking in, cooking my favorite meals when I visit, complimenting me in ways they never did before. It feels fake, too deliberate, like they want something big. I just don't know what yet. I should have known something was off when my mom called it a family meeting, spoken in that overly cheerful tone she only uses when she's hiding something. I walked into the house, expecting maybe bad news about a relative or something serious we needed to discuss, but instead, I found Emily sitting in the living room with her laptop open, like she was about to pitch to a panel of investors. She looked excited, and my parents were sitting on either side of her with these proud, expectant smiles that immediately made my stomach tighten. Before I even sat down, my dad clapped his hands and said, "Perfect timing." Emily was just about to present her big opportunity. She launched into some long, rambling explanation about a startup idea that honestly sounded more like a collection of Pinterest quotes and wishful thinking than an actual business. She talked about brand identity, vision alignment, and creative freedom, none of which came with a real plan, budget, or any concrete steps. I tried to listen without judging, but the whole thing felt like a school project, not a company. When she finished, she looked at me with this expectant glow, like she truly believed I'd stand up applauding. Then my mom dropped the bomb. "We've all agreed that you'll be the primary investor," just like that, as if I had been part of this agreement, as if I wasn't barely keeping myself afloat. I stared at them, waiting for someone to crack a smile or say it was a joke, but they just looked back at me, completely serious. I reminded them I was struggling financially, that I could barely pay my bills, but they brushed it off like it was nothing. My dad waved a hand and said, "You're overthinking it. This is how families build futures." Emily chimed in softly, "I thought you believed in me." In that moment, I realized the meeting wasn't to discuss anything. It was an ambush, and they fully expected me to say yes. The moment I said, "I can't fund this," the entire room shifted like someone flipped a switch, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. My mom's face fell instantly, and she pressed a hand to her chest like I had just punched her. "After everything we've done for you," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. My dad leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he exhaled sharply through his nose. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Emily crossed her arms and wouldn't even look at me. I tried to stay calm. I explained that I was working 2 jobs, barely covering bills, and had nothing, literally nothing, to invest in a startup that didn't even have a real plan. But every sentence I said was met with something sharper. My mom sighed loudly and said, "You always think only about yourself," my dad added. "A real man supports his family without making excuses." And Emily, she looked at me like I had betrayed her personally, whispering, "I guess you just don't believe in me." The guilt hit me like a wave. It always does with them. They know exactly which buttons to press. For the next few days, it didn't stop. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Long, emotionally loaded messages from my mom saying things like, "I raised you better than this," or "You're breaking your sister's spirit." Short, passive-aggressive texts from Emily like, "Thanks for ruining my chance." And from my dad, "If this family falls apart, it's on you." Every vibration of my phone made my chest tighten. Every message chipped away at my resolve. I kept telling myself I wasn't wrong that. I had every right to say no, but their words dug deeper than I wanted to admit. After a while, I stopped answering entirely, but even the silence felt heavy and late at night. Lying awake after a 14-hour workday, I caught myself wondering something dangerous. What if I really am the problem? That thought lingered dark, quiet, and familiar, and it scared me far more than their messages. After days of non-stop guilt, I finally decided to sit my parents down and lay everything out. Numbers, all of it. Because maybe, just maybe, they'd understand once they saw the reality I was living in. I told them about my rent creeping up every few months, my student loan payments swallowing half my income, and how I was still paying off medical bills from an accident last year. I explained that some weeks I had to choose between groceries and gas, and that the only reason I hadn't collapsed was because I kept telling myself it would get better eventually. I even opened my banking app right in front of them, showing the near-zero balance and the red notifications I had been pretending didn't scare me. I was shaking. Not from anger, but from the sheer exhaustion of having to justify why I couldn't bankroll someone else's dream when I was barely surviving my own life. They didn't flinch. Not once. My mom just gave this disappointed sigh, the kind meant to make me feel small and said everyone struggles. "That doesn't mean you stop helping family." My dad crossed his arms and scoffed. "If you managed your money better, you wouldn't be in this situation." And Emily, sitting there scrolling on her phone, didn't even look up when she said, "You could just take a small loan." People do it all the time, like the concept of debt was a cute accessory. I stared at them, completely stunned. It wasn't just that they didn't understand it, was that they didn't want to understand. My reality didn't fit the narrative they built about me being the dependable one, the one who always stepped up, the one who would sacrifice anything for family. On the way home, my chest felt tight, like something was slowly suffocating me. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how transparent I was, nothing mattered unless it benefited Emily. And deep down, a quiet dread settled in my stomach because I knew their pressure wasn't over. It was only the beginning. I honestly thought things would cool down after I laid everything out, but instead, the tension built like a storm waiting to break. A few days later, my parents invited me to another family dinner, and because I stupidly hoped they might actually want to talk like adults, I went. The moment I walked in, I could sense something was wrong. Everyone was too quiet, too stiff, like they were all waiting for a show to begin. Halfway through the meal, my dad cleared his throat and said loudly, "We need to revisit the topic of your sister's startup." My fork paused halfway to my mouth, and I felt that familiar sinking feeling in my gut. I took a deep breath and calmly said, "I already told you I can't fund it. I'm struggling to take care of myself," and that's when everything erupted. My dad slammed his palm on the table so hard the glasses rattled. "You're embarrassing us in front of the family," he shouted, his face flushing red. My mom pointed her finger at me and said, "You've become so ungrateful. We raised you better." Emily burst into tears. Not the quiet, sad kind, but the dramatic, wailing kind that instantly made everyone stare at me like I had stabbed her. Between sobs, she cried, "You don't care about me at all. You're ruining my future." I could feel eyes on uncles, cousins, family friends, all of them silently judging, none of them knowing the truth. I excused myself from the table, but before I could leave, one of my uncles gently pulled me aside. In a low voice, he said, "This isn't the first time she's done this. Emily always expects someone else to fix her failures." His words hit me harder than the shouting. For a moment, I just stood there, absorbing everything, the humiliation, the lies my parents had probably told about me to justify their anger. Walking out of that house, something inside me snapped, not in rage, but in clarity. If they were willing to drag me through public shame to get what they wanted, then whatever they were planning next was going to be even worse. I thought the dinner blow-up was the worst of it, but life has this way of showing you just how wrong you can be. 2 days later, while I was at work, I got a call from my cousin Marks, someone who rarely contacts me unless something serious is going on. His voice was uneasy as he said, "Hey, I don't know how to tell you this, but you need to check your mail. Your parents were at our place last week, and something didn't feel right." He told me he'd seen my dad stuffing envelopes into his jacket, clearly hoping no one noticed. Mark didn't know what they were, but the moment he said it, something cold slid down my spine. When I got home, I opened the mailbox and found a stack of letters crammed inside some dated weeks back. Most were from the bank, all stamped urgent in red ink. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe as I tore the first one open. And then another, and another. What I saw didn't make sense at first, but the more I read, the more the room seemed to tilt around me. There were loan documents, notices, payment schedules, all under my name, all tied to an account I never opened. My hands were shaking so violently that I could barely hold the papers. I called the bank immediately, and after verifying my identity, the representative quietly said, "Sir, this loan was taken out months ago. Using your details, is there a chance a family member had access to your personal information?" My stomach dropped. My parents. I didn't want to believe it, but every piece of evidence pointed straight at them. They didn't just try to pressure me. They had already stolen from me. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by letters that felt like tiny bombs going off around me. My chest tightened like it was caving in, and for a moment, I couldn't even cry, just stared ahead, numb. This wasn't about Emily's startup anymore. This was something deeper, darker, and I knew I couldn't ignore it. Not anymore. I didn't sleep the night I found the loan documents. I just sat there on the living room floor with the papers scattered around me like pieces of a life I didn't even recognize anymore. By morning, my eyes burned, my hands felt numb, and every part of me wanted to believe there was some mistake, that maybe the bank mixed up paperwork, or maybe I missed something. But deep down, in that heavy place where truth settles, I knew exactly what had happened. And I knew who did it. I drove to my parents' house without thinking, gripped tight around the steering wheel, heart pounding against my ribs. When they opened the door, I didn't yell or accuse, I just held out the letters and asked, "Why?" My mom's reaction was immediate and theatrical. Her hand flew to her forehead as she gasped, "How could you think we'd do something like this?" My dad stepped forward, jaw clenched, and said, "Lower your voice. You're overreacting." But when I laid the documents on the table, their signatures, dates, the forged application, everything, they froze. Then came the excuses, the twisting, the gaslighting. My dad muttered, "We wouldn't have had to do this if you were more responsible." My mom started crying, insisting they only borrowed it temporarily and planned to pay it back once Emily's business took off. Emily, standing behind them with her arms crossed, shrugged and said, "You'll be fine. You always figure things out." Her words sliced through me. By the time I got home, everything started collapsing at once. A rental application I submitted the week before was rejected because my credit score had tanked. My boss pulled me aside and mentioned financial instability flags. From an internal check for a promotion I desperately needed, and when my bank app lit up with overdraft notifications from an automatic payment connected to the fraudulent loan, something inside me cracked. I sat in my dark apartment. Electricity shut off because I couldn't afford the bill that month, surrounded by silence so heavy it felt like the walls were closing in. That was my lowest point. Rock bottom, the moment I realized I had nothing left to lose and everything left to fight for. Rock bottom has a strange way of clearing the noise out of your head. After hours of sitting in that dark apartment, no lights, no food, phone at 3% battery, stopped shaking. I stopped crying. I stopped replaying their excuses. A numb quiet settled over me. The kind that comes right after a storm destroys everything in its path. And in that quiet, something inside me finally snapped on in despair this time. But in clarity, I realized, maybe for the first time in my life, that my parents never saw me as a person. Not as a son, not as someone with limits. Just as a resource, a tool, a wallet, a solution to problems I never created. No explanation, no reasoning, no emotional plea would ever change that. They weren't misunderstanding me. They were choosing not to see me. I picked up the scattered papers from the floor and started sorting them with steady hands. Every letter, every forged signature, every threatening notice. I opened my phone and took photos of everything. organizing them into a folder titled Evidence. It felt mechanical, almost detached, but it was the first time in weeks I felt in control of something. Then I called the bank. My voice didn't shake. "Hi, I need to report identity fraud." The representative walked me through the first steps, and for the first time, someone actually listened. Someone believed me. When she said I needed to file an official fraud report and freeze all accounts connected to my name, something like relief washed over me. Heavy, slow relief, but relief nonetheless. Next, I contacted a legal aid clinic a coworker once mentioned. They told me I had a strong case, stronger than I realized. The words criminal liability and forgery hung in the air, sharp and cold, but empowering in a way I didn't expect. By the time I hung up, my apartment was still dark, still silent, but everything felt different. I wasn't helpless anymore. I wasn't trapped, and for the first time in my life, I was ready to fight back. The next morning, I woke up with a focus I hadn't felt in years. My situation hadn't magically improved. My power was still off. My fridge was still empty. My finances still wrecked, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. I spent hours filing the official fraud reports, attaching every screenshot, every document, every time-stamped call log. When I froze all accounts connected to my identity, the bank confirmed it would trigger immediate alerts for any linked activity. I knew exactly where those alerts would land, and right on cue, the panic began. Around noon, my dad called me 13 times in a row. I didn't answer. Then a text came through. "We need to talk now." A few minutes later, my mom sent long paragraphs about misunderstandings, claiming they never meant to hurt me, insisting we handle this privately as a family. Emily followed with a single line, "You're ruining everything." There it was, the truth they'd spent years hiding. Not, "We're sorry," not, "We made a mistake." Just fear disguised as concern. By freezing the accounts, I'd cut off the access they were never supposed to have in the first place. And suddenly, the people who called me selfish were scrambling to save themselves. But instead of answering, I blocked all their numbers. One by one, no hesitation. I left the apartment and drove straight to my coworker's place, a guy who'd offered me his spare room weeks ago when he noticed how exhausted I looked. This time, I accepted. When I stepped inside, the warmth hit me instantly. A working heater lights, the smell of someone cooking. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: safety. Later that evening, as I settled onto the small air mattress he'd set up for me, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I didn't check it. I didn't need to. I could already imagine the chaos unfolding back at my parents' house. They were losing control. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one paying the price. The next few days felt strangely quiet, like the calm after an explosion, where debris is still settling and you're just standing there watching the smoke rise. I kept expecting another barrage of calls or messages, but instead, everything shifted to a different kind of chaos. My coworker let me use his dining table as a temporary war room, and that's where I sat when the first email from the bank arrived. "We have initiated an investigation into the fraudulent activity associated with your identity." It didn't feel real at first, but the more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't some small dispute. This was serious, and the consequences were finally catching up to the people who caused it. A day later, my parents received their first official notice. I didn't have to see it to know what it said. The bank had informed them that the loan was frozen and flagged for fraud, and that they were required to meet with investigators. I imagined my dad reading it, jaw tightening, face turning red the way it always did right before he yelled. I imagined my mom trying to spin the story, convincing herself that they were victims, not the perpetrators. And Emily, I pictured her blaming everyone but herself, pacing around, furious that her future was falling apart. Another email came through for me, a copy of the notice sent to them. Seeing their names listed as parties of interest made something tighten in my chest knot. Guilt, but a mix of shock and inevitable justice. They had pushed and pushed for years, certain I'd always bend. Now the system they manipulated was finally pushing back. Over the next week, relatives started calling not me but my coworker's phone, because I had blocked everyone. Apparently, word was spreading. My parents' perfect image, the one they hid behind for years, was fracturing fast. People were asking questions. People were judging, and for once, the judgment wasn't aimed at me. Emily's startup fell apart completely. No funding, no credit, no one willing to help after the truth got out. She sent an email begging, then demanding, then accusing, but I didn't respond. Watching their world collapse wasn't satisfying in the loud, dramatic way revenge often looks in movies. It was quieter, heavier, a consequence, not a victory. But it was the first time in my life that the consequences weren't mine to carry. For the first time in what felt like forever, my life started moving in a direction that wasn't dictated by crisis or family drama. Living at my coworker's place gave me enough stability to really breathe without waiting for the next emotional ambush. I spent the first week there fixing everything their actions had broken. Closing disputed accounts, filing additional reports, meeting with bank representatives, and slowly untangling the financial mess they'd wrapped around my identity. Every day was exhausting, but it was a different kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from rebuilding, not surviving. I could feel pieces of myself returning piece by piece, like colors slowly coming back to a washed-out landscape, with the fraud case underway. I sat down and did something I had avoided for years. I applied for a certification program I always wanted but never felt allowed to pursue. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. I started saving again, not much, but enough to feel like I had control. My boss noticed my focus and offered me training for a higher position. Without the constant emotional drain from my family, my performance improved almost overnight. It's amazing how much clearer life becomes when you stop drowning for people who never once tried to save you. Emotionally, though, the hardest part wasn't cutting them off. It was feeling the silence afterward. My parents tried reaching out letters, messages sent through relatives, but every apology felt hollow. Every explanation still dipped in manipulation. Let's talk things out as a family. We didn't mean for it to go this far. You're tearing us apart. Not once did they take responsibility. Not once did they ask if I was okay. So I ignored every attempt. I found a small apartment a month later. It wasn't perfect, tiny kitchen, old carpet, no view, but when I turned the key for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood. Ownership of my own life, and even though things were finally moving in a better direction, I knew this wasn't the end. There was still one final thing I needed to do. Moving into my new apartment felt like stepping into a life I'd been denied for years. It wasn't just the empty rooms or the quiet evenings, it was the freedom, the absence of constant dread, the realization that every decision in this space would be mine alone. Still, even as I unpacked the last box, I knew something was unfinished, a final weight I needed to lift. My parents had taken so much from me: time, money, peace, identity, and, for the first time ever, I wasn't going to just walk away quietly. I needed closure, not for them, but for myself. So I sat down at the small kitchen table, opened my laptop, and wrote the last message I'd ever send them. It wasn't angry. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't a rant or a list of their wrongs. It was a simple, clear boundary one. They could no longer twist or weaponize. I am going no contact permanently. I will not fund anything. I will not fix anything. I will not communicate any further. Your actions have consequences, and for once, you can face them without me. I read it twice, then hit send. The responses came fast first. My mom, who wrote a long, frantic email full of tears and dramatics, "We were just trying to help Emily. You're breaking this family apart." Then my father, colder, "You're making a mistake. Blood is blood." And finally, Emily, who sent one last message dripping with entitlement. "You're choosing selfishness. Don't expect us to be there when you need something." I blocked them all without a word. The silence afterward wasn't painful. It was liberating. Weeks passed. My credit slowly improved. My certification classes began, and my job stabilized. I woke up without anxiety, without dread, without the fear of another crisis manufactured by people who claimed to love me. And one night, as I stood on the small balcony of my apartment, listening to distant traffic and feeling the cool air settle around me, it hit me. Walking away wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing I'd ever done. I didn't avenge anything dramatically. I didn't destroy them. I simply stopped letting them destroy me. And that, more than anything, is what finally set me free.